Title card. Following our investigation into global supply chain shifts, we now examine the controversial surge in Russian crude oil imports to India after the February 2022 invasion of Ukraine and the subsequent Western sanctions regime. Hook. As global energy markets fractured in 2022, India emerged as the primary buyer of discounted Russian seaborne crude, triggering intense criticism from Western capitals that accused New Delhi of indirectly financing the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Buildup. By early 2022, the United States had implemented a total ban on Russian oil, while the European Union began drafting complex, phased embargoes designed to systematically decouple their economies from Russian energy dependence and state revenue. Map_setup. Russian crude travels from Baltic and Black Sea ports, navigating the Suez Canal before crossing the Indian Ocean to reach major Indian refineries at Jamnagar, Vadner, and Paradip, a journey spanning roughly 7,000 nautical miles. Decisive. In May 2022, Indian refineries began aggressively increasing their intake of Russian Urals, leveraging significant discounts ranging from $15 to $30 per barrel, which provided a critical buffer against surging global inflation and domestic price volatility. Courage. Facing immense diplomatic pressure from G7 nations, Indian External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar consistently maintained that India's sovereign energy purchases were essential to protect its 1.4 billion citizens from the catastrophic impact of volatile global energy markets. Turning. The implementation of the G7 price cap on December 5, 2022, at $60 per barrel, created a legal framework that allowed India to continue purchasing Russian oil without violating Western sanctions, provided they utilized non-Western shipping services. Enemy. Critics, including various EU officials and think tanks, argued that these purchases directly bolstered the Russian state budget, effectively undermining the collective Western effort to weaken Moscow's capacity to continue its military operations in Eastern Europe. Cost. While India secured affordable energy, the diplomatic cost was high, as New Delhi had to navigate a delicate balance between its deepening strategic partnership with the United States and its long-standing historical ties with the Russian Federation. Aftermath_immediate. By the end of 2023, Russian oil accounted for over 40% of India's total crude imports, a staggering increase from less than 2% pre-2022, effectively transforming India into a major global hub for refined petroleum products. Witness. Observers noted that while India was criticized, European nations themselves continued to import Russian energy via alternative channels, including pipeline gas and third-party refined products, highlighting the inherent complexity and interdependence of the global energy market. Detail_A. The Jamnagar refinery, operated by Reliance Industries, stands as the world's largest refining complex, playing a pivotal role in processing Russian crude into diesel and jet fuel for both domestic consumption and export to international markets. Detail_B. Nayara Energy, which is partially Russian-owned, further exemplifies the deep integration of Russian capital into India's refining sector, complicating the narrative of simple buyer-seller relationships in the face of international sanctions and complex corporate ownership structures. Map_beat. Key Indian ports like Paradip on the east coast and Vadner on the west serve as critical entry points for the massive tanker fleets carrying Russian crude, creating a logistical backbone for India's energy security strategy across the Indian Ocean. Timeline. February 2022 marked the invasion, December 2022 saw the G7 price cap, and by early 2023, the cap was extended to refined products, creating a shifting regulatory landscape that India navigated with consistent, pragmatic, and market-driven energy policies. Stakes. At stake was not just energy affordability, but the integrity of India's strategic autonomy, as the country resisted pressure to align its foreign policy with Western blocs, prioritizing its own national interests in a multipolar and increasingly fragmented global order. Cliffhanger. As the United States begins tightening enforcement on the shadow fleet of tankers transporting Russian oil, the future of India's energy trade remains uncertain, leaving critical questions about the long-term sustainability of the current status quo unresolved for now. Next_tease. In our next episode, we will explore the rise of the rupee-ruble trade mechanism and its potential long-term impact on the global dominance of the US dollar, as India seeks to diversify its currency exposure in international trade settlements. The International Energy Agency reported that Russian state revenue from oil exports remained a primary driver of the national budget throughout 2023, despite the G7 price cap mechanism being designed to limit the fiscal resources available for military spending. India's Ministry of External Affairs has consistently argued that their energy purchases are a sovereign decision based on market availability, emphasizing that India is not violating any international law, as there are no UN-mandated sanctions on Russian oil. The G7 price cap coalition, led by the United States and the European Union, maintains that the mechanism is designed to reduce Russian revenue while keeping global markets supplied, allowing third-party purchases if they adhere to the established price ceiling. Shipping data from CPLUR and Vortexa confirms that India's import volume of Russian crude rose from less than 2% before the 2022 conflict to over 40% in 2023, marking a historic shift in India's energy trade geography. The United States Department of the Treasury issued specific guidance on the implementation of the price cap policy, clarifying that Western services, such as insurance and shipping, are prohibited for non-compliant cargo, creating a two-tier global oil shipping market. European Union Council regulations on restrictive measures against Russia include complex exemptions for energy imports, which critics argue create loopholes that allow Russian oil to reach European markets via third-party refined products, such as diesel and jet fuel. India's export of refined petroleum products to Europe has increased significantly since 2022, leading to ongoing debates about whether these products contain Russian crude and if this constitutes a backdoor for Russian energy into the sanctioned European market. The legal consensus among international observers is that India is fully compliant with international law, as the sanctions regimes imposed by the US and EU are unilateral or plurilateral, rather than mandatory global sanctions mandated by the United Nations. Energy security remains the core pillar of India's foreign policy, with officials emphasizing that the country's rapid economic growth requires a stable and affordable supply of energy, which is currently best served by leveraging discounted Russian crude oil supplies. The shadow fleet of tankers, often operating with opaque ownership and insurance, has become a critical component of the global oil trade, allowing Russia to bypass Western-controlled maritime services and maintain its export volumes despite the ongoing sanctions regime. Reliance Industries' Jamnagar refinery complex processes millions of barrels of crude annually, utilizing advanced technology to refine various grades of oil, including heavy Russian Urals, into high-value petroleum products that are exported to global markets, including the EU. The rupee-ruble trade mechanism, while still in its nascent stages, represents an attempt by India and Russia to facilitate bilateral trade without relying on the US dollar, potentially reducing the vulnerability of their economies to future Western financial sanctions. Global energy markets have witnessed a significant realignment since 2022, with traditional trade routes being disrupted and new, more complex supply chains emerging, as countries scramble to secure their energy needs in an increasingly volatile and unpredictable geopolitical environment. The Indian government has maintained that its energy policy is guided by the need to keep domestic inflation in check, arguing that the high costs of global energy would have been unsustainable for the Indian economy without access to discounted imports. Western media outlets have frequently highlighted the moral dimensions of India's oil purchases, often framing them as a betrayal of democratic values, while Indian officials counter that these perspectives ignore the fundamental economic realities facing developing nations today. The G7 price cap coalition faces ongoing challenges in enforcing the price ceiling, as tanker tracking data shows that many shipments continue to be traded above the $60 per barrel limit, highlighting the difficulties of regulating a global commodity market. India's strategic partnership with the United States remains robust, despite the friction over Russian oil, as both nations continue to collaborate on defense, technology, and regional security initiatives in the Indo-Pacific, demonstrating the complexity of modern international relations. The long-term impact of India's energy policy on the global dominance of the US dollar remains a subject of intense debate among economists, with some arguing that it could accelerate the shift towards a more multipolar global financial system in the future. The Indian Ministry of External Affairs has emphasized that India's foreign policy is based on its own national interests, and that it will continue to engage with all major powers to ensure its economic growth and regional stability in the years ahead. Energy infrastructure projects, such as the expansion of the Paradip refinery, are critical for India's long-term energy security, as the country seeks to increase its domestic refining capacity to meet the growing demand for energy from its expanding economy. The global oil market is characterized by high levels of interdependence, with crude oil produced in one region being refined in another and consumed in a third, making it difficult to isolate the source of energy products in a complex supply chain. India's approach to the Russian oil trade reflects a pragmatic and evidence-based policy, prioritizing economic stability and energy security while navigating the complex geopolitical landscape of the post-2022 era, without succumbing to external pressure or ideological rhetoric. The G7 price cap coalition has periodically updated its guidance to address emerging loopholes and improve the effectiveness of the sanctions, demonstrating the dynamic and evolving nature of the international effort to restrict Russian revenue from oil exports. The role of private sector companies, such as Reliance Industries, in India's energy trade is significant, as they operate the refineries that process the crude and manage the complex logistics of global oil supply chains, often in coordination with government policy. India's energy policy is not just about oil, it also includes investments in renewable energy, natural gas, and nuclear power, as the country seeks to diversify its energy mix and reduce its dependence on any single source of energy in the future. The debate over India's oil imports highlights the broader challenges of global governance in an era of intensifying geopolitical competition, where international norms and institutions are increasingly tested by the competing interests of major powers and emerging economies. The impact of India's energy trade on the global environment is also a subject of concern, as the increased use of fossil fuels, including coal and oil, contributes to greenhouse gas emissions and the broader challenge of climate change on a global scale. India's diplomatic efforts to explain its position on the Russian oil trade have involved extensive engagement with Western partners, seeking to build understanding and maintain the stability of its strategic relationships despite the ongoing tensions and disagreements. The future of the global oil market will be shaped by a variety of factors, including the pace of the energy transition, the evolution of geopolitical alliances, and the ongoing efforts of major powers to secure their energy needs in a changing world. The Indian government's commitment to energy security is a long-term goal, which will require continued investment in infrastructure, technology, and diplomacy to ensure that the country remains resilient to future shocks and challenges in the global energy market. The resilience of the Indian economy in the face of global energy price volatility is a testament to the effectiveness of its energy policy, which has successfully balanced the need for affordable energy with the requirements of its strategic partnerships. The international community's response to India's energy trade has been varied, with some nations expressing concern while others have recognized the legitimacy of India's sovereign decisions and the importance of its energy security in the global context. The ongoing investigation into the global oil trade continues to reveal the complexities of supply chains and the challenges of enforcing sanctions in a world where energy is a vital and highly contested commodity for all nations, regardless of their size. India's experience with the Russian oil trade serves as a case study in the complexities of modern geopolitics, where the pursuit of national interests often requires navigating a minefield of conflicting pressures, institutional constraints, and global market dynamics. The lessons learned from this episode will be critical for understanding the broader themes of our series, as we continue to explore the multifaceted relationship between India's growth, its strategic autonomy, and the evolving global order in the 21st century. As we conclude this episode, it is clear that the story of Russian oil and India is far from over, with new developments and challenges likely to emerge as the global energy landscape continues to shift in response to ongoing geopolitical events. We thank you for joining us in this deep dive into the evidence, and we encourage you to stay tuned for our next episode, where we will further unpack the complexities of India's role in the global economy and its strategic future. Ultimately, the case of Russian crude oil illustrates that in the pursuit of national development, India's choices are defined by a pragmatic commitment to energy security, reflecting a broader trend of nations prioritizing their own resilience in a multipolar world.